The day she showed up at his porch, Mason Johnson was wiping sawdust from his hands, watching his 7-year-old son draw shapes in the dirt with a stick. He had no plans beyond making dinner and getting Noah to bed on time. Just another quiet evening in a life built on routine and survival. Then the woman in the expensive dress stepped out of her car, clutching her handbag like a lifeline. "I need a husband by tomorrow," she said. Mason had no idea that single sentence was about to turn his entire world upside down. 3 months ago, Ellie Whitmore had stood in a crowd of donors at a charity event for veterans holding a glass of champagne she had no intention of drinking. The event bored her. These things always did. Wealthy people writing checks to ease their conscience while servers circulated with expensive hors d'oeuvres. But then she noticed something that made her stop. A man knelt beside a half-built wooden frame, guiding a small boy's hands as they hammered a nail together. The child's face glowed with concentration, tongue poking out between his lips. When the nail went in straight, the man lifted the boy onto his shoulders, and they both laughed. Ellie had watched them for a long time. She didn't know why. Now she understood. Standing on Mason Johnson's porch, she saw that same man looking at her with steady, unreadable eyes. He wore a faded work shirt with sawdust on the sleeves. His hands were calloused, his posture straight in the way of someone who had served. Behind him, the boy from the charity event sat on the steps, no longer laughing. He watched Ellie with the wary stillness of a child who had learned that strangers often brought change, and change was rarely good. "You know who I am?" Ellie said. It wasn't a question. Mason nodded slowly. "Whitmore Holdings. Your father passed 6 months ago. I read about it." "Then you know I'm not here to waste your time. Lady, I don't know why you're here at all." Ellie had rehearsed this speech a dozen times in the car. Every version had sounded desperate. She decided to abandon the script entirely. "My father left a condition in his will. I have to be married before my 32nd birthday to inherit control of the company. I'm the executive vice president, but without the marriage, my cousin Richard takes everything. He's the VP of finance, and he's been waiting for me to fail." She met his gaze directly. "My birthday is tomorrow." Mason didn't react the way she expected. No shock, no laughter, no immediate refusal. He simply studied her face as if searching for something hidden beneath the surface. "Why me?" The question caught her off guard. She had prepared for rejection, for demands, for negotiations, not for genuine curiosity. "Because you're not part of my world," she said honestly. "You have no connections to anyone who wants something from me, no scandals, no agenda." She glanced at the boy on the steps. "And because 3 months ago I saw you with your son at a charity event. The way you looked at him, the way he looked at you, I've never seen anything like that in my entire life." For the first time, something shifted in Mason's expression. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You've been watching me. I've been researching you. There's a difference. Not from where I'm standing." Ellie felt heat rise to her cheeks. She hadn't expected him to be so direct. The men in her world spoke in euphemisms and implications. Mason Johnson apparently did neither. "I'll pay you," she said. "Whatever you need, enough to take care of your son for years. I just need a legal marriage that will hold up until the inheritance is finalized. After that, we can divorce quietly. No one gets hurt." Mason turned his head slightly, looking at the boy on the steps. Noah had stopped drawing. He watched them with those quiet, knowing eyes that seemed too old for his 7 years. "Noah," Mason said gently, "go inside and wash up for dinner." The boy didn't move immediately. His gaze lingered on Ellie, assessing her the way his father had. Then he gathered his stick and his drawings and walked past them into the house without a word. When the screen door closed, Mason turned back to Ellie. "My wife passed away 3 years ago," he said quietly. "It's been just Noah and me since then. I work when I can take jobs that let me be home when he needs me. We don't have much, but we have each other. That's enough." "I understand," Ellie started to say. "No, you don't." Mason's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath it. You see a man with no money and no power. You think that makes me easy to buy. But my son is not for sale, and neither am I. Ellie felt the ground shifting beneath her. This wasn't going the way she had planned. Nothing about this man was what she had expected. I'm not trying to buy you, she said, and to her own surprise, she meant it. I'm asking for help. There's a difference. Mason looked at her for a long moment. The afternoon light was fading, casting long shadows across the porch. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a dog barked. A car passed on the distant road. You said you need a husband by tomorrow, he said finally. What happens after tomorrow? You go back to your penthouse and your board meetings, and I go back to patching roofs. That was the plan. It's a bad plan. Ellie blinked. Excuse me. If we get married and you disappear the next day, people will talk. They'll investigate. Your cousin sounds like the type who'll dig until he finds something. Mason crossed his arms. And then all this will have been for nothing. She hadn't considered that. She had been so focused on the deadline that she hadn't thought about what came after. What are you suggesting? Mason didn't answer immediately. He looked toward the house where the light in the kitchen window had come on. Noah's small silhouette moved behind the curtain. My son has been through enough, he said slowly. He's lost his mother. He's had to watch me struggle to keep us afloat. I won't let him think his father sold himself to some rich woman for cash. So you're saying no? I'm saying if we do this, we do it right. He turned back to face her. You live here. With us. Not for show, not for some lawyer's paperwork. You become part of this household. You sit at our table, you learn his routine, you show up. Every day. Ellie stared at him. You want me to actually live here? That's the condition. For how long? Until this thing with your cousin is settled. Until the lawyers are satisfied. Until my son doesn't have to lie about who the woman living in his house is. The weight of what he was asking pressed down on her shoulders. This wasn't a simple transaction. This was her life turned completely upside down. Why would you agree to any of this? She asked. What's in it for you? Mason didn't flinch from the question. I've got medical bills from my wife's accident that I'm still paying off. Noah needs things I can't always afford. If you're serious about compensation, that money would help. He held up a hand before she could respond. But that's not why I'm considering it. Then why? He was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer. Because you looked at my son like he mattered, not like a prop, not like a complication. You saw him. He shook his head slightly. Not many people do that anymore. Ellie felt something crack open in her chest. She had spent her entire adult life being evaluated, assessed, measured against expectations she hadn't chosen. And here was this man, this stranger, offering her something that looked terrifyingly like respect. If I agree to this, she said carefully, what happens when it's over? What happens to your son? That depends on you. On me. On whether you're the kind of person who walks away without looking back, or the kind who stays. Ellie thought about her apartment in the city, the silence that waited for her every night, the empty chair across from her at dinner. She thought about her father dead in his office with no one beside him. She thought about becoming exactly like him. I'll do it, she heard herself say. I'll live here, whatever you need. Mason nodded once as if he had known all along what her answer would be. Then I suggest you get your things, he said. Dinner's in an hour. The first week was a disaster. Ellie arrived with a single suitcase, having left the rest of her belongings in storage. The guest room Mason showed her was small, with a window overlooking the backyard and a bed covered in a faded quilt. She had stayed in hotel rooms larger than this entire house. But that wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was learning that life here moved to a rhythm she had never known. Mason woke at 5:30 every morning to make breakfast before Noah's school bus came at 7. There was no housekeeper, no chef, no assistant to handle the mundane details. Every meal had to be cooked. Every dish had to be washed. Every minute had to be earned. Ellie tried to help. On her third morning, she woke early and attempted to make pancakes. The recipe seemed simple enough. Flour, eggs, milk, a little sugar. She had watched cooking videos on her phone the night before, taking notes like she was preparing for a board presentation. The smoke alarm woke the entire house. Mason appeared in the kitchen doorway, still pulling on a shirt, to find Ellie frantically waving a towel at the ceiling while a pan of blackened batter smoldered on the stove. Noah stood behind his father, staring at the chaos with wide eyes. For a terrible moment, no one spoke. Then Noah's lips twitched. A small sound escaped him, something between a cough and a giggle. He clamped his hand over his mouth, but his shoulders shook. Mason looked at his son, then at the ruined pancakes, then at Ellie standing in the middle of the smoke with batter in her hair. The corner of his mouth lifted almost imperceptibly. "I'll make eggs," he said. It wasn't much, but it was something. The days that followed established an uneasy routine. Ellie worked from the kitchen table, her laptop open beside stacks of financial reports and legal documents. She took conference calls in the backyard, pacing between the vegetable garden and the old oak tree. The board was asking questions about her sudden marriage. Richard was asking more. Her mother called on the fourth day. "A carpenter!" Victoria Whitmore said, her voice dripping with disbelief. "You married a carpenter. Do you have any idea what people are saying?" Ellie pressed the phone closer to her ear, watching through the window as Mason helped Noah with homework at the kitchen table. "He's not just a carpenter. He served in the military. He builds things. He takes care of his son." "He takes care of his son? With what money exactly, Ellie? I raised you to be smarter than this. Richard is telling everyone this marriage is a sham. If you wanted to play house with some working-class fantasy, you could have at least been discreet about it." Ellie ended the call without saying goodbye. Noah remained the biggest challenge. He didn't openly resist her presence, but he made it clear she was an outsider. When she entered a room, he left. When she asked him questions, he answered in single words. He called her she when talking to his father, never using her name. One evening, Ellie walked past his bedroom and saw him sitting on the floor with a sketchbook. She stopped in the doorway, watching him draw with focused intensity. "That's beautiful," she said softly. "What is it?" Noah didn't look up. "A picture. Can I see?" He hesitated, then slowly turned the sketchbook toward her. It was a family portrait drawn in crayon and colored pencil. A tall man with brown skin stood in front of a small house. Beside him was a boy with the same dark eyes. They were holding hands. There were only two figures in the picture. Ellie felt something twist in her chest. She managed to smile and tell him it was wonderful. Then she walked to her room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed until the tightness in her throat finally eased. The breakthrough came unexpectedly, as most important things do. One evening after Noah had gone to bed, Ellie found Mason sitting on the back porch with a cup of coffee. She hesitated at the screen door, unsure if she was welcome. He glanced over his shoulder and nodded toward the empty chair beside him. They sat in silence for a long time, listening to the crickets and the distant hum of the highway. The night air smelled like cut grass and something sweet from the neighbor's garden. "Her name was Denise," Mason said suddenly. Ellie turned to look at him. His face was half hidden in shadow, but she could see the tension in his jaw. This was the first time he had spoken his wife's name to her. She loved this house, picked it out herself even though it needed more work than we could afford. She said, "A house doesn't need to be big, it just needs to be warm." He took a slow sip of his coffee. "She used to sing while she cooked. Noah still hums those songs sometimes, even though I don't think he remembers where he learned them." Ellie didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. "The accident happened 3 years ago. Drunk driver ran a red light. Noah was in the back seat." Mason's voice was steady, but Ellie could hear the weight of every word. He watched his mother die. He was 4 years old. Ellie felt her throat tighten. She reached out slowly and placed her hand on his arm. He didn't pull away. After the accident, I thought about selling this place, starting over somewhere new. But every time I looked at Noah, I saw her in his eyes, and I knew we had to stay. This is where she lived. This is where she's still alive in some way. He turned to look at Ellie directly. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand something. This house isn't just a building. It's not a prop for your business deal. It's everything I have left of her, and if you're going to live here, you need to treat it like it matters. Ellie met his gaze. I will. It was only 2 words, but Mason nodded as if she had made a solemn vow. 2 weeks into their arrangement, the school called. Ellie was in the middle of a video conference with her legal team when her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. She ignored it. It buzzed again and again. Finally, she excused herself from the call and answered. Mrs. Johnson, this is the nurse at Riverside Elementary. Noah has a fever of 103. He needs to be picked up immediately. Ellie's heart dropped. I'll be right there. She tried Mason first, but his phone went straight to voicemail. He had mentioned a job site 2 hours away, a renovation project that was paying well enough to cover the month's bills. She called twice more with no answer. There was no one else. She drove to the school faster than she should have, her hands tight on the steering wheel. The nurse met her in the front office with Noah wrapped in a blanket, his small face flushed and damp with sweat. He looked up at her with glassy eyes. Where's my dad? He's working, Ellie said, kneeling down to his level. But I'm here. I'm going to take you home. Noah stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly he reached out and took her hand. The drive home was quiet. Noah dozed against the window, waking occasionally to cough or shift position. Ellie kept glancing at him, terrified that his fever would spike, that she would miss some crucial sign, that she would somehow fail at this simple task of taking care of a sick child. At the house, she carried him inside and tucked him into bed. She found a thermometer in the bathroom cabinet and children's medicine in the kitchen. She gave him the correct dose, placed a cool cloth on his forehead, and sat beside him in the dim light of his bedroom. Noah drifted in and out of sleep. At one point, he started to cry, his small body shaking with sobs. Mom, he whispered. I want Mom. Ellie's heart shattered into pieces she didn't know she had left. She did the only thing she could think of. She climbed onto the bed beside him, wrapped her arms around his trembling body, and held him close. I'm here, she murmured into his hair. I'm not going anywhere. I'm right here. She didn't know how long they lay there. At some point, Noah's crying stopped, and his breathing steadied into the rhythm of sleep. Ellie stayed anyway, her arms still around him, her cheek pressed against the top of his head. That was how Mason found them. He appeared in the doorway sometime after dark, still wearing his work clothes, sawdust on his boots. He stood there for a long moment, watching Ellie and his son curled together on the narrow bed. Ellie lifted her head when she sensed him watching. Their eyes met across the dim room. Mason didn't say anything. He just nodded once slowly, and something passed between them that neither of them could name. After that night, everything changed. Noah started leaving his bedroom door open when he drew. He asked Ellie how to spell words for a school project. One afternoon, he showed her his rock collection, explaining the history of each stone with the seriousness of a museum curator. He still didn't call her by name, but he stopped calling her she. Ellie found herself looking forward to the small moments. Breakfast with Mason and Noah before the school bus came. Evening walks around the neighborhood, helping with homework she barely remembered from her own childhood. She started to understand the rhythm of this house, the quiet rituals that held it together. She was beginning to feel like she belonged. Then Richard made his move. The first sign was a voicemail from her lawyer. Ellie, we need to talk. The board received an anonymous tip about your husband. Someone's been digging. The second sign was a manila envelope delivered to the house. Ellie opened it to find photographs of herself and Mason printed on glossy paper with timestamps in the corner. Ellie leaving for work, Mason dropping Noah at school, the two of them on the porch sitting apart. Attached was a typed note. Marriage of convenience. The board will be interested to know the truth. The third sign was the news article. It appeared online first, then spread to print media within hours. The headline made Ellie's stomach turn. Whitmore heiress weds working class widower love match or corporate scheme. The article was worse than the headline. It quoted anonymous sources within the company. It included details about Mason's finances, his outstanding medical debt, his modest income. It painted him as either a naive victim or a willing accomplice in Ellie's plot to secure her inheritance. The comments section was even more brutal. People called Mason a gold digger. They called him worse things, things that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with the color of his skin. They questioned what kind of father would sell himself for a wealthy white woman's convenience. Mason read the article in silence. When he finished, he set down his phone and stared at the wall for a long time. Dad, Noah's voice came from the hallway. Some kids at school said you married Ellie for money. What does that mean? Ellie watched Mason close his eyes. She watched the pain move across his face like a physical wound. It means people say things they don't understand, Mason said quietly. Go finish your homework, son. That night, after Noah was asleep, Mason found Ellie in the kitchen. She was sitting at the table with the article printed out in front of her, reading it for the fourth time, as if the words might change. This is my fault, she said, when she heard him approach. I brought this on you. On both of you. Mason pulled out a chair and sat across from her. His face was tired, more tired than she had ever seen it. I can handle what they say about me, he said slowly. I've been handling it my whole life. People look at me and see what they want to see. A black man in a white woman's world. A carpenter who doesn't belong in a boardroom. That's not new. He leaned forward, his hands flat on the table. But Noah is 7 years old. He doesn't know how to handle this. He doesn't know why other kids are suddenly repeating things their parents said at dinner. He asked me today if we're poor. He asked me if I'm a bad person. Ellie felt tears prick at her eyes. Mason, I never meant... I know you didn't. His voice was steady, but there was something heavy beneath it. But meaning well doesn't protect my son. Good intentions don't stop him from hearing those comments at school. The kitchen felt very small and very quiet. What do you want me to do? Ellie asked. Mason looked at her for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was calm and final. I can accept losing you. I can accept going back to how things were before. But I will not let my son become a shield for your business war. He stood slowly, pushing back from the table. If you're staying here because you need something from me, from us, then maybe you should find another way. Hire lawyers, fight Richard in court. But don't use this family as your weapon. He walked to the doorway and stopped without turning around. Figure out why you're really here, Ellie. And when you know the answer, tell me. Because I need to know if this is still about the company, or if it ever became about something more. He left her alone in the kitchen with nothing but the printed article and the weight of everything she might be about to lose. Ellie sat at that table for hours, staring at the words on the page until they blurred together. She thought about her penthouse in the city. She thought about the board meetings and the legal battles and the endless, exhausting work of being Ellie Whitmore, heir to an empire she had never asked to inherit. Then she thought about pancake smoke and Noah's laughter, about Mason's voice in the darkness talking about a wife who sang while she cooked, about a little boy who had called for his mother in a fever dream, and how Ellie had held him without thinking, without hesitating, without any idea what she was doing. She thought about the feeling she had when she woke up in this house. A feeling she couldn't name until now. It was the feeling of coming home. By the time the sun rose, Ellie knew what she had to do. She just didn't know if it would be enough. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 in the morning. Ellie arrived at the Whitmore Holdings headquarters wearing a simple black dress and no jewelry. She had left her designer bags and expensive watches at the house. She wanted nothing between herself and the truth she was about to tell. Richard was already seated at the head of the conference table when she entered. He smiled at her with the satisfied expression of someone who believed he had already won. "Ellie, so glad you could make it." He gestured to the assembled board members, 8 men and women in expensive suits with carefully neutral faces. "We were just discussing the irregularities surrounding your recent marriage." Ellie took her seat without responding to his greeting. She looked around the table at the faces she had known her entire professional life. Some of them had bounced her on their knees when she was a child. Others had watched her grow into the role her father had prepared for her. All of them were waiting to see if she would lie. Richard stood straightening his tie with practiced ease. "As I was explaining to the board, my investigation has uncovered substantial evidence that Ellie's marriage to Mason Johnson was arranged solely to satisfy the conditions of our late uncle's will. The timeline alone is suspicious. A wedding within 24 hours of her birthday deadline to a man with no connection to our social or professional circles who happens to have significant personal debt." He clicked a button, and the screen behind him filled with photographs. Ellie at the kitchen table, working alone. Mason leaving for a job site. The two of them on the porch, sitting apart. "This is not a marriage," Richard continued. "This is a business arrangement designed to circumvent the legitimate terms of inheritance. I move that the board reject Ellie's claim and transfer controlling interest to the next eligible family member. As VP of Finance, I am prepared to assume full operational responsibility." The room was silent. Ellie could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on her. She stood. "Richard is right about one thing," she said, and watched the surprise flicker across his face. "When I married Mason Johnson, it was because I needed to satisfy my father's conditions. I was desperate. I had run out of options. And I chose him because I thought he would be safe, uninvolved, easy to leave behind when this was over." She took a breath and continued. "But Mason didn't agree to those terms. He told me that if I wanted to marry him, I had to live with him. Really live with him in his home with his son, not as a performance for lawyers and board members, as a member of his family." Ellie looked around the table, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. "So I did. I moved into a house smaller than my apartment's living room. I learned to cook breakfast and failed miserably. I helped a 7-year-old boy with his homework and sat with him when he was sick and scared. I listened to a man talk about his dead wife, and I understood for the first time what it means to love someone so much that you build your whole life around keeping their memory alive." Her voice caught slightly, but she kept going. "I don't know if what I feel is love. I'm not sure I even know what that word means anymore. But I know that when I wake up in that house, I feel something I have never felt in my entire life." She looked directly at Richard. "I feel like I'm home." Richard's smile had faded. He started to speak, but Ellie wasn't finished. "And I will not stand here and let you destroy the reputation of a good man just because he doesn't look like us, doesn't talk like us, doesn't come from the same world of money and privilege that we do. Mason Johnson served his country. He works with his hands to provide for his son. He has more integrity in his smallest action than I have seen in this boardroom in 20 years. She turned to face the board directly. "You can take the company from me if you want. You can give it to Richard. But you should know what you're really choosing if you do." Ellie nodded to someone at the back of the room. A door opened and her lawyer entered, carrying a thick folder of documents. For the past 2 years, Richard has been manipulating the company's financial records. He has authorized transfers to offshore accounts under false pretenses. He has accepted bribes from contractors in exchange for favorable terms. The total amount missing from Whitmore Holdings exceeds $4 million. The lawyer began distributing copies of bank statements, emails, and signed documents. Richard's face went pale. "This is absurd," he sputtered. "These documents are fabricated. This is a desperate attempt to—" The documents were obtained through a forensic audit commissioned 8 months ago, Ellie interrupted. "By my father, before he died." The room went very still. "My father knew what you were doing, Richard. He just didn't live long enough to stop you." Ellie's voice was steady now, calm in a way she hadn't expected. "He left me the company because he trusted me to protect it. Not from outsiders, from family." The board members were reading through the evidence, their expressions shifting from skepticism to shock to barely concealed fury. One of them, an older woman who had known Ellie's father for decades, set down the papers and looked directly at Richard. "I think we've heard enough," she said quietly. "I move to suspend Richard Whitmore pending a full investigation." The vote was unanimous. Ellie drove home as the sun was setting her hands loose on the steering wheel for the first time in months. The board had confirmed her position. Richard would face criminal charges. The company was safe. But none of that mattered, as much as what waited for her at the end of the road. Mason was sitting on the front porch when she pulled into the driveway. Noah had already gone to bed, and the house was quiet except for the crickets singing in the grass. Ellie sat down beside him without speaking. They watched the last light fade from the sky together. "I heard it went well," Mason said finally. Ellie nodded. "Richard is finished. The board backed me. So you got what you came for." She turned to look at him. His face was calm, unreadable, but she could see the question in his eyes. "I've been thinking about what you said," she told him. "About figuring out why I'm really here." Mason waited. "I spent my whole life trying to earn my father's approval, trying to prove I deserved the position he was going to give me. And when he died, I realized I didn't even know if I wanted it. I just knew I couldn't let Richard take it." She shook her head slowly. "But these past few weeks living here with you and Noah, I've started to understand something." She reached over and took his hand. He didn't pull away. "I don't want to go back to who I was before. I want to hire someone to run the day-to-day operations, keep my seat on the board, but step back from the rest." She squeezed his fingers gently. "I want to be here for breakfast. I want to learn how to fix a fence. I want to be here when Noah comes home from school." Mason looked at her for a long moment. Then slowly he shifted closer until their shoulders touched. "You don't have to give up your life for us," he said quietly. "I'm not giving anything up." Ellie leaned her head against his shoulder. "I'm finally choosing something for myself." They sat together in the darkness, listening to the night sounds of the neighborhood they both now called home. 3 months later, on an ordinary morning, Ellie stood at the stove making pancakes. They didn't burn anymore. Mason was in the backyard fixing a loose board on the fence, whistling a tune she had come to recognize as one of Denise's favorites. Noah came running down the stairs with a piece of paper clutched in his hand. "I finished it," he announced, slightly breathless. Ellie turned off the burner and knelt down to his level. He held out the drawing with careful pride. It was a family portrait. A tall man with brown skin, a small boy with his father's eyes, and a woman with brown hair standing beside them in front of a little house with a vegetable garden and an oak tree in the backyard. 3 people this time, not 2. Ellie felt her throat tighten. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Noah shifted his weight, suddenly shy. "I was wondering something." "What's that? Can I call you something different? Not she anymore." He looked up at her with those serious dark eyes. "Just Ellie. Is that okay?" Ellie pulled him into a hug before she could stop herself. She felt his small arms wrap around her neck, felt his heart beating against her chest. "Ellie is perfect," she said. Through the kitchen window, she saw Mason watching them. He leaned against the fence post, a hammer still in his hand, and smiled. She had come here needing a husband by tomorrow. She stayed because she had found a home.